talking about here is influences on our government. And when we talk about these influences, a lot of those come from the British, okay? The Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, where we get representative and limited government from these English constitutions, bicameral legislatures, and the rights that we find in our constitutions, okay? A lot of these rights we get from British documents. The ones we get from God, life, liberty, and property, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that we get in the Declaration. And then later on, guys, through this process, we will write our own Bill of Rights, okay, that will secure our liberties, okay? And then the English Bill of Rights. And so as people immigrated over here from England, they brought with them these ideas and these rights, okay? And so the first settlers, 1607, Jamestown, first permanent colony. Eventually, these colonies would grow into 13 with 3 different types of colonies, and they all basically set up governments because the British could not rule them from over the ocean. They were free. They had self-rule in many cases, especially in these independent colonies. So for 150 years, these people governed themselves, and they liked it. Okay, now the British are going to start clamping down on them, and they're not going to like it. Okay, so there are attempts to unify the colonies, the New England Confederation, which really this was done for defensive purposes against native tribes up in New England. It lasted for 40 years, and then the Albany Plan that Benjamin Franklin proposed, bringing all the colonies together, did not work, but it kind of put out a framework for unifying the 13 colonies. And trying to unify them is going to be difficult, okay? Communication is, to travel is all done by horse. You can't, it's not quick communication here, okay? So for 150 years, the legislatures made up of the people that lived there, mostly white male property owners, they were the ones that controlled the money, they controlled the governors, they controlled their salaries, and so they felt rather independent, although they all respected the fact that they were part of the British Empire, okay? But when the French and Indian War takes place, guys, this is where things start to go south, okay? And with this war, you've got Britain falling into debt, and they want help to pay for that. So they start implementing the taxes. All right, we will rebel against that. Okay, no taxation without representation. We don't have any representation in Parliament. You go back to the Petition of Right, where it said you can't tax the people without consent of Parliament. Okay, well, we don't even have a say in Parliament, and they're taxing us, so we rebelled against that. So this is where you start to see the revolution begin, okay, against the British, all right? And so they start, with John Adams writes this Rights and Grievances here. You get the Boston Massacre, and then the Sons of Liberty grow out of this committees of correspondence, okay? This is colonial resistance. Now, most of this is happening in Boston and in Massachusetts, but Virginia's having issues too. But mostly this is a Massachusetts problem, okay? So once the Tea Party happened, the British are going to come in with these intolerable acts in 1774, what they call the coercive. It coerces into behaving. These really start to restrict the colonies, okay? And it affects all of them, New York, Virginia, South Carolina, all of them. And so these acts by the British are going to bring the colonists closer together, okay? And then this whole thing is going to really take off after the British send troops to Lexington and Concord. And what they're after, what the British are after in Lexington and Concord. Any guys ever been to Boston? It's a really good trip, okay? Like, if you get a chance to go to Boston, first of all, Fenway Park. Okay, it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet Earth. Fenway Park. Okay, it's like stepping back in time. All right, I went in 2004, the year the Red Sox broke the curse and won the World Series. Are you guys familiar with the curse? Adeline, do you know who the Boston Red Sox are? You heard of them? Okay. So a long time ago, there was this player. He was a pitcher. He also hit for the Boston Red Sox. His name was Babe Ruth. You heard of that guy? And the Red Sox traded him to the Yankees. And for, what was it? 90 years, the Red Sox did not win the World Series. Okay? They call it the curse of the Bambino. The curse of Babe Ruth. They should have never traded him. Okay? Because obviously he went on to become one of the greatest players that ever lived. Yes? 2004, they broke the curse. Okay? And you can walk basically from one end of Boston to the other. Okay? And there's all kinds of history. Okay? During the American Revolution, the British could have burned Boston. They could have destroyed it. But they didn't. And so all that history that we're talking about now is still there in Boston. Okay? So it's a really neat place to go visit. Okay? While you're up there, go to New York City as well, because that's a pretty neat place to go as well. 2004 was the last year of the house that Ruth built, which is the old Yankee Stadium. So we went to a game at old Yankee Stadium and then went up to Fenway. Okay? It's perfect. So the stage is set for war. All right? A lot of people taking writing, so I'll wait a second before I move on here. So these other taxes they put on were like the sugar, tea tax, okay, Townsend Acts. They said that they could only buy certain goods from other countries. They had to buy certain goods from Britain, like English tea. They had to buy British tea. Okay, they couldn't import it from other countries. And this really angered people. Okay, and one of those people is John Hancock. Hancock's a ship owner. Okay, he's smuggling. He's smuggling in sugar. He's smuggling in tea from other places. He's smuggling in alcohol, all kinds of things. And so he's working with Sam Adams. Okay, Sam Adams is kind of this character that lives in the kind of the underworld of Boston. And these are two. It's an odd couple. This very wealthy ship owner and this tavern owner. Down in downtown Boston. Okay, these two will be kind of the backbone of the Sons of Liberty, Hancock and Adams. Okay, so when the British under Gates, after the Tea Party, basically Boston is occupied by the British Army. Okay, and so to combat the Intolerable Acts, they're going to call the First Continental Congress, okay? They're going to meet in Philadelphia. So 12 of the 13 colonies will send delegates, okay, to represent their colony in Philadelphia. And they're going to meet in Carpenter's Hall. This is Carpenter's Hall here. If you go to Philadelphia today, it's actually called Independence Hall. Okay, this is where they're going to meet and sign the Declaration of Independence in Independence Hall. Okay, it used to be called Carpenter. Okay? Now, going for Boston or for Massachusetts, John Adams, Sam Adams, John Hancock. going for Virginia, George Washington, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin will be there for Philadelphia or for Pennsylvania. Okay, they're sending the best and brightest of their colonies to Philadelphia for this convention. Okay, now this convention has no real authority in the view of the British. This is just the colonists getting together to talk. Now, not a lot is going to get done in this First Continental Congress in 1774, but they do sign a Declaration of Resolves, okay, which is going to basically say to the king, look, these intolerable acts, they're awful, and we're not going to live like this. So they called for a boycott of British goods until the policies were changed. And guys, by the way, Boston Harbor has been shut down. So any of like John Hancock's ships, they're not allowed to use the harbor. After the Tea Party, they closed it. Okay, so this is a problem. Okay, so they send this to the king, and how does the king respond to this? He responds with even tighter controls against the colonies. This is not working. So General Thomas Gates is in Boston, okay? And Gates is going to send troops out to Lexington and Concord. Anybody know what they're housing out at Lexington and Concord? What they're after out here? What they're looking for, the British troops? Okay, Hancock and Sam Adams have been stockpiling weapons, guns, powder, bullets, okay, musket balls, outside of Boston in Lexington and Concord. Now, when the British march, they march in columns. What color coats do they wear? Red, bright red, okay? They used to, the Bostonians used to call them lobster backs. You know, they eat lobster up there in Boston, right? Okay, up in New England. They call them lobster backs. Well, guys, the militia, which I think I mentioned in the other lectures, guys, in 12 of the 13 colonies, all you men in here would be forced to join the militia at starting about the age of 14. You would learn how to march. You would learn how to fire your musket. You would learn basic military strategy, how to take orders, and so forth. Okay? So the militia has been around since the early 1600s. And they have fought since the early 1600s in these wars against the Native Americans, against the French, and so forth. They know how to fight. But the British are the best, well-equipped, well-trained army in the world. But they fight in what are called linear tactics. When Europeans would fight during this time period, in a war, they would generally line up on a battlefield in a linear tactic. One group would be on a knee. There would be one standing behind that one's on a knee, and another in the back reloading. So you would fire a volley, then you would retire to the back. The next group would step up, fire another volley, and the first team to leave the field lost. This is freaking nuts. Let's just line up in a straight line and shoot against each other. It's crazy, but there's honor in that. There's honor in standing and facing your enemy and not hiding behind a tree so you don't get shot. Okay? Well, guys, our militias have learned the tactics that the Native Americans have over these years. Okay? So as the British are marching in columns wearing red, making all kinds of noise, you can hear them coming. they will be met on the road to Lexington and Concord by the militia, or they refer to the Minutemen, that could come at a moment's notice. Guys, they are good at protecting the neighborhood. That's what militias did. They protected their neighborhood from native tribes. Okay, they were good at this. And so as the British marched out, they were met on the road, and they were pushed back to Boston. Okay, there were many killed on both sides. Now, when I talk about this militia, we are talking about guys younger than you fighting against the British. We're talking about teenagers. We're talking about doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, farmers. Okay, this is the neighborhood. Everybody's got a gun. Okay. This becomes known as Patriots' Day, and April 1775 is the shot heard around the world. This is the beginning of the American Revolution. Okay. Now, today we have Patriots' Day, April 19th, and then there's also Patriot Day, which is September 11th. Okay. First time I heard them called September 11th Patriot Day, I'm like, wait a second. That's April 19th. Patriots, Patriot. Okay. All right, so now blood has been spilled. Massachusetts blood has been spilled. Okay, so they said they would meet again, okay, in May of '95 if needed. Well, it's needed. Okay, and they were looking for Sam Adams and John Hancock. They were wanted for treason. They didn't find them. Okay, the British didn't get there. They didn't find Adams. They didn't find Hancock. Okay, so less than a month later, on May 10th, they go back to Philadelphia. Now, guys, if you're living in South Carolina, that's a long trip. For John Adams, it's a 3-day horse ride. 3 days on horseback to get to Philadelphia. Okay. So they're coming back, okay? 12 of the 13 colonies again. This time, New Jersey's late. They'll eventually show up. The Second Continental Congress will actually last from May 10, 1775 to March 1st, 1781. They're going to be meeting in this building on most days. Now, you guys know the Declaration of Independence is July 4th, 1776. Okay. So from May of 75 to July of 76, the debate will be, how do we deal with the British? Now, guys, when they met in May of 75, nobody was like, hey, we need to declare independence. Nobody was saying that out loud. You know what I mean? Only in private conversations were they looking at, hey, maybe we need to become our own country. Okay, that was not the purpose originally of this Congress. Okay. It was a way to reconcile, figure out how to reconcile, get our rights back from the British, okay, and have freedom in the New World. That was the discussion, okay? And guys, the road to independence is not going to be easy. Now, one of the things that I've learned from just studying and reading about this, okay, is the story of John Adams here. Okay, most people don't know a lot about John Adams. He was the second president. He's the first vice president. He's the second president of the United States. Okay, everybody knows who George Washington is. Okay, everybody knows who Thomas Jefferson is. But what do we know about John Adams? We know John Adams represented the British soldiers that fired and killed 5 Bostonians in the Boston Massacre. He's a lawyer. He's also a farmer. Okay? And he did not want to break with Britain. He wanted Britain to respect the colonies and give them the rights that the people in England had. George Washington had served us alongside British generals in the French and Indian War. George Washington wanted to become a British general, but he was never allowed to because he was not born in Britain. He was born in America. And so Americans were treated as second class to the British. And so it's going to take some convincing. There's a lot of people that want to reconcile with Britain here. But once Lexington and Concord happens, guys, shortly thereafter, if you know some of the American Revolution, the Battle of Bunker Hill takes place. Okay? This is where William Prescott says, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes. The British are coming up Bunker Hill, and the colonists are fighting them. Okay? And a lot of people are going to die. When that happens, this happens like with 10 miles to where John Adams' farm is. And he's down in Philadelphia trying to convince them, we need an army. The militia's just not going to do it. We need an army. Okay? So, one of the first things they're going to need to do, and this is a good picture in the background here, okay? This is the Second Continental Congress. The president of the Congress is actually John Hancock, which is really interesting. He's one of the richest men in America, but he's a Sons of Liberty. He's a radical, and they chose him to be the president, which says something, okay? It's interesting, okay? You've got Ben Franklin here. You've got Thomas Jefferson here, okay? This is George Washington. There's one guy that shows up every day to this Congress wearing a military uniform. It's George Washington. He's 6'4". The average height of the American male in 1775 was 5'7". He's 6'4". He's wearing his military uniform. Now, does George Washington have a distinguished military career to this point? No. He started the French and Indian War. He screwed up. Okay? He doesn't have, but he's respected. He's been in the Virginia militia, the head of the Virginia militia for over 10 years. Okay? He's the tallest man in the room. Okay, so Hancock actually wanted to be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Okay, so the Continental Army. Guys, they're making this up as they go along. This is all brand new. This has never been done before. Where a country spawns out of nothing, basically. Okay, so they're going to form an army even before they declare independence. Okay, that wasn't easy. Okay, but the fact that Massachusetts, blood had been spilled. Okay. They're going to form this army. Okay. So Washington, guys, they call for enlistments in the Continental Army. Washington's army will be 20,000. So enlistments take place across the colonies, and people are told to go to Cambridge, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. Okay. The British control the city. Now I'm giving you some revolutionary history here. Okay. This is good stuff. You look at the city of Boston. Okay. There's a harbor here. Okay. This is called Dorchester Heights. So the city's kind of down low, these Dorchester Heights. This is Boston. You have all these ships, okay? These are all the British, the Royal Navy is all in here. that's an occupied city. One of Washington's generals is a guy named Knox. General Knox is going to go up to Canada, to Fort Ticonderoga. Okay, it's a British fort up in Canada. And he's going to attack it. And they're going to steal all the cannon from this fort at Ticonderoga. And they're going to bring these cannon back down from Canada. That's that upstate New York. So across the Hudson River, across the Catskill Mountains, okay, Lake George, they're going to bring these cannon down with oxen. Okay, and under the cover of darkness, Knox is going to line Dorchester Heights with all these cannon. So when the British wake up the next morning, they look out and they're surrounded by American cannon. Their ships are all vulnerable to these cannon. So the British, they flee. They take off because they don't want to lose their navy. So Boston is safe. So the British fleet, the Royal Fleet, goes up to New York City, which is one of the largest harbors in the world, deep water harbors in the world. Okay, so Washington takes his 20,000 men up to New York City. Okay, now these enlistments of these 20,000 in the Continental Army, they don't have enough guns, they don't have enough uniforms, they don't have enough bullets, smallpox is running around, and they're in trouble. So when they go up to New York, Manhattan Island, I don't know if you guys know New York, okay? Brooklyn. So basically what happens is Washington's ready to fight the British. And then he realizes that they're trapped in Brooklyn. If they get defeated here, he's going to lose half his army. Instead, he just turns tail and runs. They didn't even fight. I mean, they barely fought in New York City. And so Washington's going to take his army all the way back down to Pennsylvania for the winter. Now, these European armies don't like to fight in bad weather. They don't like to fight in the winter. I mean, who wants to fight in this crap out here? You know what I mean? We're freezing out here. We don't want to be outside. We don't, it's too cold to fight. So everybody retires for the winter, and they go down to Valley Forge, okay? And it's that first Christmas in 76, Christmas of 76, that Washington will cross the Delaware into Trenton, New Jersey, and attack the Hessians, okay? That famous photograph of Washington crossing the Delaware. That's one of their only victories in the entire American Revolution. Washington will lose far more battles than he will win. But there's a couple big ones. Saratoga, New York in 77. This lets the French know, because we need the French Navy, because we don't have a Navy. We need the Spanish Navy. Okay, so we show the French and the Spanish, who are enemies of Britain, that we have a chance to win. Okay, so that French Navy is going to pay huge dividends at the end of the war in a place called Yorktown, which will be the last battle of the war, and the British will surrender. Okay, that's not till 1783. Now, I just did the American Revolution in 10 minutes. Okay, but the enlistments of these 20,000 men are like 6-month enlistments. They're not 2-year enlistments, because these soldiers have to go home for harvest. They've got to harvest. They're farmers. They got to go home. If they don't grow the food, there's not going to be any food for their families and their neighborhoods and so forth. So it was a very difficult situation. You had the militia fighting as well, along with the Continental Army. But Washington pulls off the David versus Goliath here. No question. Okay? And that's why, we celebrate this. There's a great book, I don't know how many of you guys like reading, but there's a great book called 1776 by David McCullough that takes you through the American Revolution with Washington. And it's an incredible story of how they defeated the British. And so I just, I know this is government class, but I'm trying to give you a little bit of history here. Okay, so guys, in order to pass anything in the Second Continental Congress, you got to have 9 of 13 colonies agree. Now, with all these men, so some of the colonies have 3 delegates, some have 4. So if you have 3 delegates and you know, 2 of them say no for independence, 1 says yes for independence, that's a no. Okay, you needed 9 of 13 to vote for independence. But guys, if you only got 9 and 9 of the 13 said, let's go for independence, what about the other 4? We are going to start this country in a civil war against other colonies? So it's actually John Hancock that says, look, if we're going to vote for independence, it needs to be unanimous. You have to have all 13. And as Ben Franklin said it, we must all hang together, or we will most all assuredly hang separately. All of these men were committing treason. And the king told him as much. He said, these people will be hanged for treason. Okay? So, putting their name on this document, signing the Declaration of Independence, is signing a death warrant. Now, they asked Jefferson to write it. Jefferson was never good at public speaking. Okay, he didn't like to talk. Okay. I guess we're going to get to dress down tomorrow too, huh? For the other half? Nice. So Jefferson wrote it, but there were 5 men on the committee to write it. Okay. So John Adams, Ben Franklin, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman. Okay. So before they brought this document to the whole Congress, these 4 other men, you know, they kind of critiqued it for Jefferson and so forth. Okay. There's going to be some things that Jefferson writes in this document that some of the colonies are not going to like. Okay. Jefferson is a slave owner. He's from Virginia. But he realizes when he writes this thing, if we're really going to do this right, how does he start? All men are created equal. You know what I mean? So he has some clauses in there about slavery and doing away with slavery. In order to get the southern states on board with this, guys, they're going to demand that those clauses are deleted. There's going to be a big fight over this. Okay? This just doesn't happen overnight. So when we talk about slavery and an opportunity to do away with it, we fail here. Okay, as a nation, we failed to do away with slavery in 1776. Okay. However, if we persisted in doing away with slavery, there's no way we're getting this 13 out of 13 to join. It's just not going to happen. Okay. So you can look back at these men, many of them which were slave owners, and criticize them at this moment in time for not doing away with the institution. Guys, there is no United States of America if they do not compromise on this issue at this point. And I know slavery, guys, in our view today is an uncompromising issue. It's wrong. It is ugly. It is inhumane. But there's no country without it. There's no way to start the country without this compromise. Okay. So this government kind of lays out, or this document lays out the type or maps out the type of government that they wanted. Protections of basic rights and liberties, right? Unalienable rights, as Jefferson called them. Okay. And then relying on the consent of the government. We studied that in the last section. You guys wrote about it on your test. Okay. So this is the document. And George Washington was named Commander-in-Chief on June 15, 1776. Okay, so that was, they got there in May 10th, and June 15th, they set up the Continental Army. Okay. Now, how are they going to pay for that? Yeah. So they're begging for money from the different colonies to help pay for the Continental Army. Okay. They've got an uphill battle. So this Congress will be in session for over 6 years. Okay. There will be times where they will have to flee Philadelphia because the British are getting too close to the city. Okay, so they have to break out. Okay, and leave. Okay, getting low on time here. I think I'll stop here, and I need to collect money from you guys. So homework due tomorrow night, and I will pick up from here tomorrow. Thanks for coming in, guys. We had 2 visitors today.